Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Steven Wernick, CEO of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, Shmuel. Shana Tova.
We are 3 days away from Shabbat, so we will not be discussing our usual parsha of the week, but rather Rosh Hashanah. And I think there is no better way to begin than quoting from the probably most famous prayer of Rosh Hashanah, Untane Tokef. This is how it begins. Untane Tokef קדושת היום, כי הוא נורא והיום, ובוא תנשא מלכותך וייכון בחסד כיסאך ותשב עליו באמת. We lend power to the holiness of this day, for it is tremendous and awe-filled, and on it your kinship will be exalted, your throne will be established in loving kindness, and you will sit on that throne in truth. I must say, Rabbi, that the more concise version in Hebrew, at least to my ear, is more powerful when we talk about this prayer.
It reminds me of the old Yiddish joke that it always sounds better in the original Yiddish. Look, for a native Hebrew speaker, I think that's obvious. The poem was written in Hebrew, as much of our liturgy was throughout the ages. Hebrew's known as Lashon HaKodesh, as the holy language, and remarkably, one of the decisions that Jewish people have taken through the ages that allowed for the revitalization of Hebrew as a spoken language was that most of Jewish history, Jewish text was written in Hebrew. It might have been translated into the lingua franca at the time, but it was written in Hebrew. And so for centuries, our great sages and scholars, when struggling with the relevancy of Torah for their day, their answers were composed in Hebrew. So that's not surprising that today, especially for you, Shmuel, as a Hebrew speaker, native Hebrew speaker, that you would find the Hebrew to be concise and powerful. But it's really the theology of the prayer that's so striking. What the poet does in this piyut, in this liturgical prayer,
and we should say that this is a relatively, well, in Jewish time, this is a relatively recent text. It's not from 2,000 years ago.
Right. My point, though, is that Jewish text for 2,000 years has been written in Hebrew.
Right.
Right. And so this prayer, even though it was written 700-800 years ago, was written in Hebrew. So for a native Hebrew speaker, it's not surprising your response.
Right.
But where I want to get to is the theology. See if that's surprising. Right, the theology is what makes this prayer so profound, and the climax of the High Holiday liturgy, the climax of the High Holiday Musaf service, because in a remarkable feat, the poet has transformed the image of the end of days, which is the image of passing before God for judgment,
right,
after we die, to a here and now experience. Right, that's the image of Unatan Tokef. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we prepare, we mimic the act of judgment before God, and so we lend to this day, right? That's the switch. We lend to this day. We elevate this day to one of awesome and holy power, as if we had died, and as if we're coming before God, the King of Kings, the Sovereign of Sovereigns, the creator of the universe, in judgment for the way in which we lived our lives. And that's what makes it so awesome in the original meaning of the English word anyway, right. And certainly more akin to the Hebrew of Yirat Adonai, Yirat Hashem, having that sense of awe before God. And with God.
And it's not just awe, it's also apprehension. The most powerful paragraph in this prayer says, Mi yhyeh u'mi yamut, mi bekitzo, mi lo bekitzo. we are becoming much more aware of the fact that we don't know what the future holds for us.
Well, that's the part of this prayer that I think gets most modern readers uncomfortable, right? It gets us uncomfortable in two ways. One is because the theology is one that people who are university educated struggle with, right? This notion that there's this God that determines our fate, right? This is the theology of God as the puppet master, and that for each of us, our destiny, our fates are predetermined. Mi yichya mi yamut, who will live and who will die. And then on the other hand, it makes us uncomfortable from another theological perspective, if this is where you're coming from. And that is, there are just some things in the universe that are out of our hands. We don't know what our fate is going to be. We don't know who's going to live and who's going to die. But then if you read further down on that section, it's very blunt in terms of the mannerisms or the ways in which human life might be extended and celebrated, or unfortunately ended. Right? Mi yichya mi yamut, who will live and who will die, who by fire and who by water. You know, who among us, certainly in the United States, who among us will not be thinking about hurricanes as we sit in shul for Rosh Hashanah, and the terrible floods that have impacted the city of Houston, right. The way in which Florida, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas were devastated by not one but now 3 hurricanes in a row. How can we not think about all the lives that were lost in the homes that were destroyed this year by water? Who by sword and who by beast? We're still fighting. There's still so many wars that are happening in the world. Syria, ISIS, terrorism in Europe, and murders and terrorism here in the United States as well. Who by hunger and who by thirst? The Jewish community, the Masorti conservative community in Uganda, is suffering from one of the worst famines that Africa has ever experienced. USCJ made it a point this year from its disaster relief funds to send enough money in order to provide food for 2,000 people for at least a month, and we'll probably be doing more. Who by earthquake and who by plague? The devastating earthquake that just took place in Mexico, and it goes on. But like you read the litany of possibilities of right. Life and death in Unatana Tokef, and in the last 3 weeks, we've seen so many of them that there's something really profound this year and real that comes to our attention, and that disturbs us.
And this is brutally detailed, but if you keep reading, you suddenly realize that it's not really only a matter of faith. It is truly something we can do. We can do something about this.
Well, that's the element of Jewish theology that I always love, and why I continually choose to be engaged Jewishly from a religious perspective, because there is a practicality of it, and a tradition which has been around for a long time, has multiple theological perspectives that they've developed to how we deal with this. And so the conclusion of Unatana Tokef are the words Utshuva, Utfila, Utzdaka, Ma'avirin et Roa Gezerah, which I find in many Machzorim is translated incorrectly. This is where being a Hebrew speaker is really important, right? In most Machzorim, it's translated as Tshuva, Tefillah, and Tzedakah avert the severe decree, as if to say that if we were only to perform, right, Tshuva, if we would repent, if we would elevate our spiritual selves to prayer, if we would perform the mitzvah, acts of tzedakah, of righteousness, that would avert whatever decree that we have. But that's not really what the Hebrew says. It's the addition of the word et, right? That teaches us that what the Hebrew is really saying is that these acts of repentance, prayer, and tzedakah, of justice, avert the severity of the decree. Right. They can take the sting out of it, right? So we might not be able to stop floods in Houston. We might not be able to control who's going to live or who's going to die, but certainly emergency services and government in our days did everything leading up to that in order to help people make the types of decisions by which they could increase the likelihood of their survival. And certainly we as human beings, we can take the severity of this natural disaster out of the experience of people who were victimized by it through acts of kindness. Of course, emergency services do that all the time, but all of the funds that we raise to make sure that people are safe, that they have medicines, that there's clothing, that property that's not covered by insurance, especially in our synagogues and other holy places, are replaced. The fact that I'm taking Houston as my example, the fact that Lakewood Church, which is this huge evangelical church run by Reverend Jim Osteen, has opened its doors to Beth Yeshurun, which is the largest conservative synagogue in the United States, for the high holidays. All of these acts, some of them simple, unnoticed, some of them more grand, all of these acts are a response to mi yechia mi yamut. They all come down to tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, ma'avirin, et roa.
And would you say that this is the general message of Rosh Hashanah, that we are both reminded how powerless we are, but also are being encouraged to being empowered by the holiday and by these righteous acts?
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. And I think it goes deeper than just Rosh Hashanah and this day. I mean, it's the whole Machzor. It's as if the whole Machzor is coming to remind us that we're vulnerable. But yet, within that vulnerability, on the things that we can control, we can provide a lot of control. Right, and I think here too, even if I can wax a little bit political, right? You know, the debate in the United States about climate change, for example, the scientific community seems to be almost unanimous that global warming is an outcome of the industrial age that we human beings have created, and whereas it won't stop hurricanes, they don't cause hurricanes. The fact that the ocean temperatures have risen 1 to 3 degrees in the last several decades, there seems to be a consensus in the scientific community that adds to the ferociousness of the hurricanes. And so, you know, all the things that we're learning about in terms of the environmental movement and reducing our carbon footprint and lowering emissions and so forth, if we can stabilize climate change or slow it down, we can, at the very least, as human beings, we have the capacity to perhaps stabilize the ferociousness of hurricanes. And even for those who reject that science, we have the capacity to respond to other human beings in need. We have the capacity to cultivate within ourselves a religious spirit that is constantly reflecting on who we are, where we want to be, and we have guideposts from the Machzor in terms of the types of behaviors that we have to continue to cultivate, habits of holiness. I think that's what the Machzor cries out to us for, and in fact, even literally cries out for when we hear the sound of the shofar.
Rabbi, so we can agree to begin this year with a cooler temperature, both weather-wise and maybe on some other fronts as well. I wish you Shana Tova and thank you so much.
Shana Tova.